by the time I get this video uploaded, it's probably going to be Friday, which is just a few days before the eclipse, which is on Monday. One of the last minute grabs I did from Amazon was to get this solar scope. And this is a telescope that is only suitable for looking at the sun. Now, I don't necessarily suggest that you get one, because after this eclipse, the United States isn't going to see one in the continuous 48 for another 20 years. I mean, if you're interested in looking at solar spots, then it might be a great grab, especially as I see things like this are already going on clearance, as it is becoming more and more doubtful that any order someone makes would get to them before the eclipse on Monday. But let me go ahead and open up this box to see what's inside. So the box is sealed in plastic. I'm going to start by breaking it. Okay, first small convenience to point out is the box does have a handle that's built in, so presumably when you're not using it, you can put it back in this box and carry it around. Forget what I said about the handle. This comes in its own carrying bag. Let's take a closer look. Let's get out of plastic and take a closer look at it. Okay, so here's the bag that everything is coming in. So I think within here it's just going to be the telescope and a tripod. This bag does not weigh a lot, so it would be fairly easy for anyone to carry. Let's open it up and see what's inside. Okay, so there's the telescope, but I'm going to come back to that in a second. There's something else in here. I'm going to feel some weight. This is more of the telescope. Okay, so I found the eyepiece and I found the diagonal. Both of these go inside the telescope. Let's set these aside and get the rest of things out of the bag. So we've got an instruction manual. So Velcro down with some straps. There's the telescope inside of some bubble wrap. Let's set this aside for a second. And then we have the tripod, which also has its own little bag. Don't know why the tripod has its own little bag. Maybe that's to keep it from scratching the telescope while they're both inside the main bag. Okay, so the tripod's inside of some plastic. Let's take that off. So lots of plastic in it. So this looks like a fairly standard tripod. It has a 1/4-inch screw on there, so if you have some other photographic equipment, you could use it with this. Or alternatively, you could mount this solar telescope to some other piece of photographic equipment. Let me get the telescope itself. So here's the telescope itself. It is a pretty small unit, but still fairly large as far as solar viewing equipment goes. If you've used a regular telescope, one thing I'll point out is you usually have a finder scope. On solar scopes, in place of your finder scope, which you normally look through, you end up having a contraption like this, where it's just a small hole over here, and then you have a lighter background over there. And the thing is, you don't want to look directly at the sun while you're trying to aim it. Instead, what you do is you move the telescope around until the light being projected through the small hole falls in the center of this bullseye that's on the other side. And I'll show you a closer look at how that works in just a moment. How to put this together, it looks painfully obvious. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. If you've used any type of tripod before, this will be obvious, but I will point everything out anyway. So right now, without the telescope mounted, you can probably see these things more clearly. There are some knobs. There's three knobs on the tripod that are of interest to us now that constrain its movement. The handle for the tripod itself, if you turn it, it's actually one of the knobs. So whenever it's loose, it will allow you to aim the telescope up and down. When you get it to the elevation you want, you can just turn it clockwise and it will tighten to prevent any further movement. If you wanted to be able to turn it to the left or the right, the screw that's here on the right hand side, I'll loosen it, and now I can rotate this along the plane. Once I get it to the spot I want to look at, once again, tighten it, and now it's locked in place. If you needed to adjust how level the base is, there's another screw for adjusting that. More times than not, you end up not using that. Now this fourth screw is going to be the one for tightening the telescope and putting it in place. So let's do that now. There's actually one more screw that I forgot about, and that's this one that's on the other side. And it is used so that you can move the tripod up and down. Once you get that to the elevation that you want, you can tighten the screw for it to stay in place. Okay, I'm installing the telescope itself. Sync audio. Putting the telescope in place is going to be pretty obvious, but if you look in the bottom of the telescope, you can see that there's a screw right there in the middle of the base. That screw just aligns with the tripod. To put it in place, I can turn the screw underneath this tripod base and it is tightening the telescope in place. And once you've got it tightened all the way, then that's it. The telescope won't be going anywhere. Now that it's secured, we can get the eyepiece put in place. To keep dust out of the telescope, a lot of these pieces are going to end up having caps and covers. So before putting the eyepiece in place, there are a few screws that are around where the eyepiece goes. So let's go ahead and loosen those so that I can remove this cap. Now in theory, or I don't even need to say in theory, using the diagonal is completely optional. Usually it'll help you in getting this put in a more comfortable position. It does not absolutely have to be there. But the part that does not have screws on it is a part that's going to go into the telescope. Put this in place and I can just tighten both of the screws. And these screws do completely come out because I accidentally just removed one by turning it far enough. Okay, so that's in place, and if you wanted to change the angle of it, you could of course loosen the screws, rotate it into whatever is comfortable for you at that point in time, and then tighten them back. You can see the diagonal itself also has a dust cover in it. So now let's take the eyepiece. And so here's the eyepiece. That's actually a pretty big viewing area. Just take this out. Put the eyepiece in place. And that's it. So everything is put together. The telescope is ready to be taken outside so that we can look at the sun. So I'm going to take this outside and see if I can get a camera or my phone to look through it just so that you can see how things look. I'm going to make an attempt to demonstrate aiming while holding a phone. So here you can see that we have the aiming hardware. So as I'm adjusting the telescope, stop it here for a second, you can now see that there's the little glowing dot that's there in the bullseye. So that's the sun coming through. In order to get this thing properly aimed, I have to keep moving the telescope until I get that in the very center. And once it's in the very center, I need to move it up a little bit. You want to go ahead and just aim it as perfectly as possible as you can from here, which I'm not going to be able to do with one hand. But once you have it in the very center, then it is, okay, here we go. That's as close as I'm going to be able to get on the phone. But once you have it in the center, then that means that the telescope itself is also centered on the sun, and you should be able to see it through the scope. If you look and you can't see it, you might need to wiggle the scope a little bit to the left or the right until you get it perfectly within view. Something else to do if you're having trouble with aiming, take the eyepiece off. And here I have the eyepiece off. Now with this, you'll be able to move it around and do a lot more crude movements until you can finally start to see the sun. Once you get the sun centered within this viewing area, that's when you can put the eyepiece back on and do finer tuning on your aiming. I figure one of the best ways I can show you how things look through this is to attach my camera to it and take a few photographs. I've removed the diagonal and I've just attached my DSLR to it using the 1.25 inch adapter that I have, and this is the same size as used for the eyepieces on another telescope that I have, which is why I already had something that was available to fit this. So let's take a look at how a photograph looks through it. The first picture I'm showing you looks pretty bad, and I did want to go ahead and show you this. Now with this first picture, I let the camera take a picture with all of its automatic settings enabled, and you don't want to do that. It's going to be compensating for a lot of black that it sees in the photograph. Let me zoom out here so you can see the size of the actual photograph. So you can see that's the rest of the sky, which shows up black because, of course, it's nowhere near as bright as the sun. And when it compensates for all that black, you end up with an overexposed sun. In order to get this looking the way that you want it to look, you're going to have to use manual settings. Now, once I manually set the exposure and the timing for the photograph, then I've got this photo. Now, yes, there is haze in there, so it's not perfect. That haze is from the light reflecting on the inside of the telescope. But the photograph is still clear enough for you to be able to make out some sunspots. So for the price of this cost, I actually thought this was pretty good. So if you want to get something for looking at the sun, this is a very inexpensive option. Well, the eclipse is going to be in a few days now, and in the Atlanta area, the forecast is actually showing kind of cloudy. The good thing is I'm somewhat optimistic because even this picture that I took of the sun was taken through a layer of clouds. So perhaps I'll still get to see something. And that's everything that I have to show with this. So until next time.